The mind can go offline when it is stressed, and it can end up losing all of its power of thought, which makes it unable to correct itself once it becomes thoughtful again. The mind uses chi for just about every function that it performs daily. So when it becomes unable to use its energy sources anymore, because it is stunned in some way that disempowers it a great deal, it can lose track of time and be unable to right itself again afterwards. Meaning that a person can go through a shock where they zip out of their body, and things can go on without their awareness of it due to the mind becoming stressed to a point of disassociation. This leads to that individual not remembering all of what happened while they were out of their mind's allness of thought, due to no conscious awareness being present within their mind. Instead, an out-of-body setting is used, or one of an altered mind, or even an unconscious mind state could be initiated, which means both eyes turn off their vision and that person goes numb on a level of response due to so many parts of them being unable to comprehend reality. This is all because a startling event has made that person unable to know now in all ways possible, due to the mind recognizing that a trauma is taking place. So it zips out of the now setting of the mind, and it shifts its energy off center, which allows it to blank out certain details of an ordeal that this person is going through. This is how some people can remember only a small amount of what happened during a life-threatening experience, or they can relay exact information up to a certain point, while the accident or carjacking or terrifying event itself is not available to them at all. These kinds of scenarios are commonplace, and while it is a good thing that the mind does this to some extent, it can also be negative after the fact, due to that person now having unprocessed trauma energy stuck within their body. The mind disassociates in a moment of shock, and it leaves its present state, so that should that person become harmed physically or in a violent way, they can get away from an attacker, for example, by them conserving their energy due to them being blanked out in their mind. When a person disassociates, it prevents the body from responding correctly to what is going on, as it takes the mind being presently aware in order for the body elements to know what is going on. So when the mind jumps away from a traumatizing event and it disassociates outwards away from the mind's center point of now, it leaves behind only a fragment of thought so that it can know everything once it has returned to being fully consciously aware. When only a portion of the mind is held in I am, or the central point of thought, while the mind's totality of energy of a consciousness kind exists away from center, it means that the fragment records all of what took place, while the entirety of thought is unknowing of that event. This allows the mind to return to normal again once the ordeal is over with, and it communicates with the mass that stayed behind in a way where it blanks out all of what it is saying, so that it processes it out of the body without it becoming stunned by what that fragment of thought knows about the painful experience. When this takes place, the mind forces that content of thought to leave, because it knows it to be a traumatic episode that this person has been through without any doubt in its mind. And this leads to it exiting all thoughtful mass that is connected to a painful ordeal via the waste system, so that it never speaks to that person again. This is what is supposed to happen. However, in some cases, people don't silence the fragment that is telling a story about a shock that this person went through, which leads to that individual hearing things of a harmful nature 24/7, due to their mind not shutting off the speaking elements of that portion of the mind. Another problem that can arise is the fragment beginning to talk long after the ordeal or painful time of life is over with, due to some kind of trigger initiating this response. And this can cause a lot of confusion for that person on a level of awareness, as their mind will be engaging in a past where something bad happened instead of the present moment. As well as another issue also becoming a problem, where the fragment that holds an old trauma suddenly remembers to tell that person something important by it speaking up from the ground where all of that person's memories are held. Each of these problems can make a person unstable mentally, and in a way where they lose their mind often to disassociation, all because a traumatic event has not been dealt with effectively, or in a way where the conscious mind knows that it is over with. When the mind has to listen to old events on repeat all of the time, it can make it unable to be healthy or now in its processing of reality, due to it being boggled by confusion. And this leads to it then having complications with grounding out of the mind any of the thoughts that this person has each day, due to it no longer knowing where the ground is. Meaning that a signal could be prompting the mind's totality from the Earth's storage area of ground, which makes it believe that it is somehow the subconscious of the mind when it is not, leaving that person compromised in a way where their mind continues to ask the ground questions as if to inquire about the well-being of that individual. Instead of the mind anchoring down into ground all of its wasteful thought mass, it holds on to it due to it not knowing where the earth resides anymore, as it has convinced itself that ground is the sub-state of mind, causing it to become deluded in the process. The mind needs to know up from down, as well as the universal realm from the earth, in its database of knowing. Otherwise, all of the waste of the body has a hard time being let go of, as no thoughts of down and out exist anymore when it comes to the mind's processing of waste. Instead, it believes the ground to be the underlayer of mind, or a watery substance of thought that helps it to forget, when in actual fact the ground layer of energetic material is a place of remembering each and every detail of all that has occurred ever. When the mind sees ground as subconscious, it leads to a lot of issues for that person's allness, in a way where they can no longer identify who they are and what they're doing anymore, because all through their system of chi exists old truths, as well as old knowingness of self and traumatic residues of painful past experiences. This is all because that person has adapted to thoughts of an unhealthy kind that have them looking below the body to know what to do to help that person to move on in their life, instead of them inquiring with energies held within the head that need to be cleared out when that person is energized enough to do so. This kind of complication, while bizarre, is actually far more common than people think, because a moment of stun can make a person delusional or mindless or otherwise compromised in their thoughts in a way where they no longer know up from down. The mind can jiggle around and operate abnormally when a person is stressed severely, and if that individual loses all of their chi from shock, it can make the mind remain in an off-center position away from its central point of power. When the mind separates out in a moment of disassociation, it can leave behind a fragment of thought that already has a trauma contained within its mass. So when another one becomes layered into its consciousness field of energy, they can mix together and begin speaking of things that make no sense when the mind reforms itself into wholeness again. This mass of energetic thought that now holds two shocking events in its conscious awareness could confuse the mind so badly that it convinces itself that one thing is the other, or that both things happened at the same time, or worse still, that two different time periods are somehow the same. And this leads to associations coming to play out in the mind, where all of reality can then have negative connotations to it, and the world around that person is stained by what happened to them in their past due to signatures being given off by a layered fragment of mind. When a person has this kind of awareness inside of them that tells them corrupt information on a non-stop basis, it can make them unhinged in their mind to such an extent that no part of them is now anymore, and instead that individual will be expressing out of them how they once felt at the time of both tragedies occurring, which makes all of the body respond in an abnormal way. When the mind believes the past to be now in some way, where it is being prompted by old mass that speaks of tragic encounters, it can be possible for the totality of being to mimic those old traumas simply because that person's mind is being triggered to remember something harmful. When a fragment of truth from an old time of life remains a part of the consciousness field of all of the mind's totality, it can pollute the awarenesses, and in doing so, that person then frets and worries in a way which is past until such a time as that memory is no longer talking to their mind. If this layered fragment of truth does not ever become removed from the overall mass of thought, it can lead to that person never identifying themselves correctly again as the person that they truly are, because no part of them is here and now in its awarenesses. Instead, that person will be thinking past tense thoughts that create past tense feelings, which only serve to exacerbate the problems going on inside of that person's body. This leads to more thoughts of the same over and over again, all because an old trauma is stuck speaking to the mind relentlessly. The mind's consciousness of I am is something of a field of energy that listens to everything in the head on a moment-to-moment basis. And this then causes the I am to act upon all that it knows so that the body performs its duties accordingly. The I am is something of a mass of thought of a concentrated kind that helps people to be powerfully aware of the totality of all elements of self, so that when action is taken, it is assertive based on who that individual is according to all of their evolution. Meaning that if this person has moved on from times of disempowerment and found themselves to be someone who is kind and caring, despite life dishing out some tough times to be worked through, then they will express out of them a lot of glowing light that makes them abundant. Just as if someone who has been through struggles and dictatorship and them being ruled over by a tyrannical figure, and they come to be in a loving situation afterwards, they too would express out of them a joyful light that is powerfully attractive to all of the good things that life has to offer. However, when an old trauma is triggering the mind, and it is telling that person terrible things about their past, then this can overrule the mind's thoughts of a healthy and productive kind, leaving that person unable to will towards themselves anything positive at all, because no light will exist in center to work alongside the I am. The I am needs light-filled chi within the body's center in order for it to will that person towards what they desire most. This is due to the I am being a concentrated field of light and mind energy, as well as conscious awareness. When the I am is low in light, it makes it difficult for it to use its manifesting abilities at all, because it draws into the body nature energies of chi that help people to grow. With no way to do this, the mind is left unable to visualize a way forwards to the next thing that has been thinking of, as no light-filled chi exists to encourage it to be powerful, and instead all it sees is an empty void due to it being bothered by so much old waste that it cannot fathom anything other than what it has known before now. meaning that this individual will not be able to see what they could become through some kind of evolution coming to them, and instead they will only be able to look to who they were before as a reference material. This leads to complications with letting go of whatever harmed that person to begin with in a moment of stun, as the mind cannot come to grips with moving on from an ordeal that this person has been through. The mind loses control of now thoughts that contain elements of future time held within them, because no part of the I am is willing to look to the future to see what is there, as it is convinced that this is the direction of thought that leads it to the past of that individual. When the mind is boggled in a particular way, where it lets go of the here and now, and it becomes disassociated, it can then find itself in a predicament where it no longer knows left from right, up from down, in from out, and front from back, due to the eyes no longer being presently aware. This can then cause the mind's awarenesses to change themselves, where they adapt to the boggled perception instead of the one belonging to the conscious mind, which leads to problems from then on with forwards thought. The mind needs to always be thinking in a way where it knows now, and it defines it correctly in the center point of its field of conscious awareness, as well as it also needing to know to pull in from the front of the brain all of its new intel so that it learns of what is coming next. It also needs to push back away from itself any old thoughts that no longer need to be thought of, so that they do not bother the mind. And it also needs to know how to draw down from the universal realm all higher awareness, so that it can best serve that person when it comes to their evolution. Just as it needs to know how to anchor down into ground, so that an exchange takes place with old energy going into the earth and fresh new grounding chi coming into that person's physical body. When the mind perceives incorrectly, it can cause a person to never ground down and to not receive higher knowing into them, as well as for all forward thinking to stop, because the mind is confused about which direction is what. This then makes all of that person abnormal in another way, where they identify as their past self instead of a combination of the self of now and the future self form of energy, due to a backwards mind state initiating when the mind was jiggled around by trauma. When a person identifies as past self, it can make them adapt to old fears ruling over them and old knowingness telling them what to do, as well as them having difficulties with old awarenesses dictating to them about what is allowed on a level of the production of chi, because their mind is conversing with an old version of themselves instead of the now. This problem is common in people who've been traumatized severely, or in a way that was so shocking that they lost their mind to some degree, as well as it being a problem for individuals who have suffered with abuse or violence, because they can about face in their mind through them being boggled by stress and come to see something in their past state of being that they did not know about themselves, which then fixates their mind in an unhealthy way. They could see elements of what they went through when a veil of illusion was over their eyes, if they were disassociated as previously mentioned. And when the mind sees that this person went through an ordeal that it does not know consciously, it can decide to learn all that it can from the past self state of being, and not return to focusing forwards, because it is perplexed or otherwise confused by what it is learning from an old time of life. This can result in that person never having forward thoughts to future ever again, because their mind will not let go of the idea that it needs to know more of the past. In order for a person to go through life normally, they need to be forward-facing in their mind's concentration, as well as them receiving inspirational thought from a part of them that exists in a future state of being known as the future self. This part of the allness is something that picks up on prophetic information that is given to it by both the higher self knowing what it does of what is coming next, as well as the earth realm instructing that person with helpful intel that leads them towards successful outcomes. This is how people can know things ahead of time, or they can predict events before they happen, and how people guide themselves away from danger, or they happen to be in the right place at the right time. It is all intuitive intel being given to them by their self-energy forms that know things that they do not in the moment of something happening. When a person is traumatized, however, in a way where their mind is facing the back instead of the front due to confusion, then that individual will fail to ever know what is coming towards them in the form of good or bad encounters, because their head will be on backwards, so to speak, due to the mind's attention being placed solely on the past. This kind of predicament makes a person fall victim to relentless sabotage on top of all of the other things formerly mentioned, because they will be tripping over themselves and all of their traumas instead of them seeing a clear path forwards. When the future is past, or the mind is looking to old content instead of new energies of evolution, it can scare that individual into a submissive state of response where they're unable to assert themselves ever due to some kind of conflict or threat or time of bereavement staring them in the face instead of exciting times of future being known to them. A backwards-facing mind never looks forward to anything, and instead it dreads waking up each day, it loathes going to sleep, and it resists all progressions brought on by daily activity, meaning that it will backpedal and use all of the will and the chi of being as a force of opposition, due to it believing wholeheartedly that this person is walking themselves into dangerous encounters because it is staring at some past experience that scarred that individual. What needs to happen is for the mind to recognize that it is facing the wrong way, and for it to never think the wrong thoughts again, so that it does not about face again after it has been corrected. And the best way to do this is to clear away all traumatic mass that speaks of a shocking ordeal, so that the I Am grows back its lightful chi and becomes powerful. Once the I Am is full of light and empowering chi, it can then kick out any remaining residues of thought that were held on to in a moment of something stunning that person's mind. And then when all of the mass of grief, for example, is moved away from the head, that person thinks new thoughts of evolution. This is the simplified version of what actually takes place when a person decides to let go of their past, and more will be explained in other content. The mind just needs a little nudge to recognize what it is doing that is wrongful, and then it can decide to change its perception and how it is doing things, which results in evolutionary thought. The sacred symbols of the stars are something that can prompt this change, because they outline to the mind how to perceive correctly, as well as how to know up from down, etc., so that moving waste material out of the mind is something that is easy for it to do. Instead of that person continuing to think the wrong thoughts all of the time, they decide to try something different, and in doing so, they allow new thoughts to enter the consciousness field of mind, when maybe they were resistant to doing this beforehand. When new mind energy is welcomed in, it automatically shifts old content outwards, away from the mind's totality, And this leads to that person no longer being bothered by old mass that speaks of past times of life anymore, because it is simply reflecting on what happened rather than it being engaged in thoughts of a concentrated kind. The sacred symbols of the stars are something that stimulates the mind to become more consciously aware, as well as more thoughtful in the now, so that it is always its most powerful. That way, it can decide what is best for it in each moment, instead of old traumas dictating to it and leading it astray. The sacred symbols of the stars formation outline to the mind how to come back into a centralized state of thought, so that it can tell all of the components of being about the present moment. That way, this person expresses themselves according to all of the empowerment within them, also known as their light, so that they manifest the life that they desire. Each symbol helps the mind to learn things that it has forgotten over time, so that it re-establishes its ability to move that person in whatever direction that they choose, so that they achieve the goals that they are trying to accomplish. When the mind looks to old wounds instead of now full content of reality, it can make it unstable and unable to bring to that person all that they need on a level of chi, making that individual tired and drained and demotivated all the time because no part of them is willful or assertive. The chi of being plays an integral role in motivating a person each day. So when it is low in its vitality, or it is hardly existing in the body, it can make a person suffer with sluggish behavior, where they no longer want to engage in the world around them. And this leads to isolation and problems with going outdoors, as no chi is available to this person that is full of abundant lifeful matter, because their mind is blocking it from entering the body. The reason that the mind sees a problem with doing this is because it is looking to a time of past rather than the now, and it is seeing a problem in that person's life with negative things going on, which leads it to restricting flow to get that person's attention so that they make the changes necessary in order for their well-being to improve. Only the mind is seeing a vision of the past that is telling it something obscure, such as that person being in a violent altercation, when in actual fact that happened a long time ago, and the mind is simply confused. This makes all of the body respond to what the mind believes is real, even if it is not, which can cause a lot of problems for that person energetically on a level of malfunction. What needs to happen is for the waste material of thought to be let go of, as well as associations to the past, so that the mind returns to seeing the current moment again, rather than something that is past. Then, the flow of chi into the body can return to normal again, as can the flow of life, which makes that person come to be different in an abundant way. This is all possible by you looking to symbology that helps the mind to go back to its normal functionality after it has become confused or boggled or bewildered or other by some trauma that happened to you at any moment in time.